Who would have thought? Melody support in 2020 or 2021, depending on which release date you pick.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today we've got a very surprising reveal, or at least the card is not so surprising because we knew it was gonna be revealed today, but what type of archetype and deck it would support is very surprising, because today we've got the second VR revealed to us, which is Star on Stage Plan, and I think nobody was expecting it to be a Melody boss unit, and oh boy, is it a Melody boss unit? But Plan wasn't the only Bermuda card revealed to us today, because there was a second card that is flowing under some people's radar that was put onto the Bushiroad's Japanese website, which is something very, very interesting that could change the direction or the power level of one of the previous budget decks that we already discussed on the channel. So with that, let's dive right into these two cards and see what they mean for Bermuda Triangle and what type of wacky things will come out even more from Twinkle Melody. And that special support card that I'm referring to is this grade 2 Viling Reverie Petra. And Petra has two abilities, and her first skill is Auto and Vanguard Circle. When placed, cost Soul Blast 2, search your deck for up to one Sweetest Sister Mirror, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your deck. So this is Sweetest Sister Mirror support. And it's a pretty good searcher, because it just, if you can ride her, you immediately can search out of your deck, so increasing the contingency of getting to your mirror as soon as possible and as efficiently as possible. Now, you might think to yourself, being a Vanguard skill is quite annoying, as it's yet again another auto Vanguard Circle when play skill, and we've seen quite a lot of this in this Bermuda Triangle set. But keep in mind, there is another grade 2 within this set that basically allows you, once you ride her, to then check top 7 and fetch any other grade 2 and immediately ride it. So you basically not have 4 copies of this card, but you effectively have 8 copies of this card if you also run the other grade 2 to increase the consistency of riding in those specific grade 2s, which at least makes those cards a lot better. But this consistency bump to the mirror engine isn't completely the reason why this card is pretty good. That's because of her second skill, as this card is basically the win condition of the Sweetest Sister Mirror deck and really solidifies the deck to be a control type engine, because her second skill is Auto Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, if a card was put into your drop zone from the damage zone this turn, until the end of the battle, your opponent cannot call Sentinels from his or her hand. So basically, when you healed, and that is something that Mirror can do every single turn after the second turn she's your Vanguard, she can block Sentinels. And with Mirror increasing the power every single turn, and it increases more and more and more, at some point, this becomes unguardable, and it becomes your win condition, as you're probably going to pick Force 2 with Mirror, so this is going to deal 2 damage, your opponent cannot block it, and they're going to die. Period. So it really solidifies the Sweetest Sister Mirror engine as a control deck, because they tried to control the pace of the match, stall, and once they accumulate enough resources, then they can slam this thing to the field, and maybe 2 to both sides, and basically say to your opponent, well, here's 4 damage, you cannot deal about it, and you're now going to die, and it doesn't really matter. I think this is a really good card for Sweetest Sister Mirror, as now the deck has an actual goal to strive for. So yeah, Petra, very nice addition to the Sweetest Sister Mirror engine. Now, of course, she wasn't the main attraction of today's reveals, because that goes towards our new VR, which is this grade 3 Star on Stage Plan. Surprise, surprise, is Melody support, because she has the Melody skill. But she has 2 very specific skills that are blowing up in the community, and I'm gonna be honest, when I first read the skill, I was blown away what this card could do. But the more and more you read it, and you understand what the card actually does, it becomes a lot more fairer than it actually is. And I will explain that once I read the skill for you guys. Her first skill is Continuous Vanguard Circle. During each main phase and each battle phase, this unit gets all of the abilities of all the cards with Melody not named Star on Stage Plan in your soul. So we have seen this skill on other cards. It's basically a different type of the Cross or Gastille or any of those cards that can copy other skills like Rising Nova. Only in her case, it's a bit easier to set this thing up because it just stacks everything that's in the soul. So if you can write one of the grade 2 melodies, she can get that skill. If you can write one of the grade 3 melodies, she will get those skills. And interesting enough, she copies all the skills. As long as the unit has the melody keyword tagged on top of it, she can copy even the non-melody skills. But keep in mind, she can only use Vanguard-centric skills, as she isn't able to use the rearguard-centrics, but most of the melody skills are Vanguard units. You might immediately think this is insanely strong because it can copy things like Sonata, the grade 2, and the Sonata grade 3. We have the Fina, the Carol, and all that kind of stuff that you can stack. And yes, this is definitely very powerful, but it requires a lot of things to set up to immediately get something good out of it. Because keep in mind, she herself doesn't really have a melody skill. She does have the melody keyword, so she also gains the acquirements of other units. So effectively, if you write a grade 2 Sonata and you write her on top of it, she basically becomes that Sonata with some extra abilities attached to it. Granted, with her other skill, you can even shove in more units, so it becomes easier to fulfill this, but it depends on your scenario how good this can be. But in the long run, once you can stack up multiple cards in the soul, then things are going to start looking really interesting. Because we have a couple of melody cards that have a very interesting Vanguard-centric skill, but their melody skill itself is very lackluster, so nobody really played them. And I'm not really familiar with the names themselves, but we have a grade 3 melody card that can make on hit effect just hit. Or we have the Vanguard skill on a melody unit that's Soul Blast free to force the Battle Doris skill on all our attacks. Some of these skills can be very useful in a specific situation, but weren't warranted enough to run them at high quantities or write them as a Vanguard unit because they're not ideal in most scenarios. Now with a skill like Plan, you can easily run one off or two offs and then use their abilities in the right circumstances and shove them into the soul via various means, and then still have the effect of those cards while not losing on other strong Vanguard skills like Sonata. That in itself isn't the only reason why this card is so insane, because her second ability fuels this effect while gaining even more advantage. Because its second ability is act on Vanguard Circle once a turn, cost Counterblast 1, and put a rearguard with melody into your soul. Draw a card. So this allows you to not only get more melodies in your soul by just writing, you can also shove them into your soul with a counterblast and you lose a rearguard, but you draw a card back, so it's a net 0 in a card advantage on that part. But if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you get an imaginary gift Force, Excel, or Protect. So not only can you put a melody unit into the soul and draw a card, which then gives Plan even more abilities and making your field stronger, you could then either get another Force marker, you could get an Excel marker, or you could get a Protect marker. So depending on what your scenario is, and a melody that's either a Force 2, because you're not going to go for Force 1, so either you can get 2 Force markers in the turn, or you get a Force marker and a Excel circle, or you get a Force marker and a Protect marker. So depending on the scenario, you could go for a very strong push with 4 attacks that you can gain that extra Excel circle, or you can be a bit more defensive if you know you cannot kill your opponent, but you need that extra Sentinel in hand to survive, you can get that Protect marker. And because this is an act ability that can create more markers, you will always create a marker every single turn, even without needing to rewrite, which is very powerful. And the fact that you can put now any melody card into the soul, as well with rewriting, it becomes a pretty good powerhouse and a good boss unit for the entire melody engine itself. Now, I'm gonna be real with you a bit. This card, when you read this, you think, oh my god, this is gonna be broken, this is insane. We have like a unit with infinite melody skills is gonna stack because you can have 2 Sonatas into the soul, which basically gives you plus 10k on every single unit without needing to call anything else. So even if you call more Sonatas to the field, it's more power, and you have all these crazy combination of extra melody units. And then on top of that, you can create any marker, so you can create more Excel circles, and you pick Excel 2 that draws you more card while also giving melody more attacks. Yes, that sounds insanely powerful, but the fact is, this card on average, on the very first grade 3 turn, doesn't really change anything for melody itself. Because on average, you're probably gonna write a grade 2, and you're gonna write it, and maybe you get a grade 3 into your soul. Maybe, if you can activate her skill, or maybe get anything else into the soul. But to get more value out of the grade 2, you probably need to write a Sonata. If you did not wrote a Sonata on grade 2, then that grade 2 melody unit probably won't affect your game state, and it's as if you wrote any other normal grade 3 unit for melody, so let's say a Sonata, and that's it. The only moment where this thing changes a bit is that if your opponent went first. But that means you had to sit through your opponent's grade 3 onslaught, be that Gurgrid, Ezel, Vanquisher. You need to survive that. And then you finally can go into this thing, which is basically a Sonata Plus that gives you an extra marker. In most cases, you're probably going to go for an extra 2, so you can get one more extra attack out of that. Even that extra marker in today's circumstances doesn't really sound that crazy as a first grade 3 turn. And it is only applicable if you went second. If you went first, it's just a somewhat normal Melody grade 3 turn that we've seen today. And Melody is nowhere to be found in current meta environment. So that doesn't really sell this card very good. It's better if you went second, but that's also not that great. Now, if we take it to the positive side and see it can create that extra circle, so our field becomes bigger and bigger, which allows Melody to finally swing with multiple attacks, so they're probably going to be very deadly. Keep in mind, because you now have multiple units, that means more of those attacks will not swing with double criticals, which was one of their selling points, that every attack is probably with double critical, so you had to guard everything. Now, the more and more you're going to spread out, the more and more likely is that most of your attacks is just 1 damage, and suddenly those numbers aren't really that scary if they're 1 damage. But another factor to keep in mind, she increases the positive sides of Melody, so your attacks become stronger, because the more Melody on the field, the more power it stacks, because Melody shares among all your units, and you have more attacks, so those higher numbers will mean something more. But at the same time, your weaknesses become even more of a problem. One of the biggest problem of the whole Melody deck is field control. If their fields get wiped, they will lose a lot of tempo. And because you're now going to dedicate more and more cards into the field, because your field is going to be bigger, if your opponent has access to a field nuke, it will hurt you way more than it would hurt you before this card came out. And also the fact that you're now putting more cards into the front row, that means your opponent has more options to just damage deny you by ramming into your rear guards, as they have more targets to attack. And with that damage deny aspect comes to another aspect where this card might not be as great as it first looks. Her second ability to gain that marker costs a counterblast. Keep in mind, you're probably gonna get Sonata in your soul, because Sonata is the best card to get. Sonata also cost you a counterblast, which means you're now using 2 counterblasts a turn to use your complete play, which in the past was just 1 counterblast with Sonata. So suddenly, damage 9 becomes a lot better against Melody, which isn't a good sign for the Melody players. But that said, nonetheless, this is an upgrade for the Melody players and for the Melody engine itself, because it gives the Melody deck a cohesive boss unit, as no longer are you working around Sonata being your main unit because it gives you the most value on the Vanguard circle. It's basically now this card, this is your Vanguard, and you try to shove in all these different Melody cards into the soul and gain all kinds of wacky combination of skills and find your win condition, as there's a lot of options to explore. And with that, we've basically seen 2 new cards for Bermuda Triangle. Both of them are very, very interesting. One is basically a support card for already boss unit that we saw last week. And now we see a new boss unit for Melody, which was honestly a big surprise. And I'm very curious of which direction you're going to take. With that said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new cards from Bermuda Triangle. Do you think that Plon is an insane card and is going to wreck the meta? Or do you think it's a nice upgrade to the Melody engine to at least bring them to today's standards and maybe finally compete? Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. This video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timeleaf, and I see you guys in the next one!